You guys hear me?
Yes.
Yep.
Yep.
It was dead silent, so I wasn't sure if something was wrong.
Okay, it's 10:01. I think I'm going to go ahead and, 10:01, and I think I'm going to get started on the meeting today. Thank you everyone for joining. And my name is Brett Estes. I'm the city manager in Astoria. And I want to thank you all for getting on this meeting today to have a informational session about the pre-submittal for the Astoria Waterfront Master Plan request for qualifications, which is out on the streets. And so before we get started, I'm going to introduce a few folks who are associated with this project. First of all, I'm going to introduce John Southgate, and John is working on behalf of the Astoria Development Commission, again, a subset of the city of Astoria, helping us with this request for qualifications. Also, we have Meg Leatherman, who is Astoria's Community Development Director. We have Jeff Harrington, who is our Public Works Director. And then from the Port of Astoria, this is a joint project between the City of Astoria and Astoria Development Commission and the Port of Astoria. We have Matt McGrath, who is the Deputy Port Director, and we have Will Isom, who is the Port Director as well. And I'm going through the Hollywood squares here, and I see there's one additional City of Astoria representative who I failed to mention. We have Jonah Dart McLean, who is our Parks Director. And so I'm going to give just a brief kind of introduction to how this whole project got started. And I think that Will Isom from the Port will also be providing a little bit more information. But this all came together as the Port was looking for opportunities to look for ways to reuse and redevelop an area around their mooring basin on their main port facilities here in Astoria. And they were having a need to be able to look at some structural stability of some overwater buildings. And when that started happening, a conversation started between the Astoria Development Commission and the city and the port as to ways that we would be able to partner together to be able to come up with a plan that would be mutually beneficial for the port and something which the city would be able to support as well. And so city staff and port staff began to work together to be able to come up with some of the parameters that are included in the request for qualifications, and the commissions on both sides also became excited and very energized about this opportunity to be able to partner together for this endeavor. So while the Astoria Development Commission will be the entity which is leading this planning process, there is going to be direct and inclusive participation from the port throughout the entire endeavor. And we'd be looking at the end and bringing this back to both commissions for approval. And this is really an exciting opportunity for the city and for the port to be able to look for ways to be able to reimagine this area of our community and make it a more vibrant place. So I'm going to now turn this over to John Southgate, and I'm going to let John be kind of the master of ceremonies of sorts to be able to run through our agenda, and there are going to be some other folks who will be chiming in, and I'm going to let John manage that process. So welcome and thank you for joining.
Great. Thank you, Brett, and thank everyone for joining us this morning. This is a great turnout. The last I looked, we had, 86 attendees. So anyway, that's very encouraging, and I think that speaks to what an exciting project, what an exciting opportunity this is. What I'd like to do, Jen, if you could show the agenda for a moment again, and I will be kind of steering the car here through an overview what we're trying to do here. Brett has already provided that in a real rough, very high-level overview. Key elements of the RFQ, focus on the process, the selection process, and the timeline. Want to definitely leave time for Q&A, and maybe I'll just say right now that I imagine you'll have questions that we're not going to want to answer that will require some work on our part. So this is more about gathering questions. If there's obvious ones that we easily dispense with, we will. But this is an opportunity for you to ask questions that will help us get back to you later this week. Our intention is, well, we'll talk about that when we get to the Q&A. So let's talk about the overview. Oh, two other little housekeeping things. I am told that my computer sounds like a vacuum cleaner at times, so I'm going to try to mute when I'm not talking about it. I apologize in advance. The Hoover people have helped subsidize this program, so I needed to do that for them. And then the other housekeeping thing is, Brett and Will et al. As I get through each section, feel free to jump in. I'll try to remember to call on you, but if I miss something or maybe misstate something, I would invite my friends from the city and from the port to either refine or correct any misstatement. That said, so let's jump into overview. I'm going to start by reading something. This is from the RFQ. Fundamentally, the Commission and the Port seek a team that will produce a plan that sets forth a long-term vision that is both aspirational but also grounded in market realities, a plan that inspires community members and captures their imaginations, a plan that contributes substantially to the economic prosperity of the port, the city, and the surrounding region, while honoring Astoria's history and culture. So that's kind of the elevator speech, but trying to do a lot of things here. When Brett first invited me down to Astoria in November, December, you know, like any good Oregonian, I've been to Astoria hundreds of times and gone to the Column and all that, but I was just reminded what an extraordinary setting, and I know a lot of you listening on the call know that and have done work in Astoria. And I look at it as there's a great canvas here that is waiting to be painted on. There's a lot of vacant or vastly underdeveloped property. I think this area deserves better. I always say that if you're dealing with a corner of Allen Boulevard and Murray or something like that, with no offense to my friends in Beaverton, but that's not as important. This is part of Oregon's history. This is where Oregon American settlement started here, the oldest American community west of the Mississippi. So it's an amazing site that deserves the best. As a reminder, the port owns the entire site. If you're wondering about the somewhat gerrymandered boundary, it aligns with the port. That's a real advantage to me, because when you have a single owner, a public agency owner, they can have a long view, they can have a level of sophistication and looking at a long-term return on investment. They're not stuck with dealing in immediate crisis. That said, I think early wins, I'm a big believer, and I think my colleagues from the city and the port agree. Don't just have a long-term vision that in 15 or 20 years might be cool. What are some things, some early interventions that could help get us started on the path towards that long-term aspiration? The vision should acknowledge and build on earlier efforts, particularly the 2007 waterfront vision. So this is not abnegating that or replacing it. It's building on that and refining it for this particular set of properties. I apologize, I'm going to read some of these notes. I vetted these with Brett and Will beforehand, so I make sure I'm getting what they agree are high points. There is a desire for mixed use, for more activity, higher density, stronger multimodal connections. This is sort of a transition area. This is not the heart of the industrial waterfront, and Will or Matt can correct me if that's wrong, but I think this is more a transition area where I think there's a hope and expectation for mixed use housing, lodging, commercial restaurants, as well as industrial, serving residents, workers in the area, as well as visitors. So this is not a tourist plan. I think that is kind of, well, I guess one more thing. This, we do want action. Again, this is not a plan that's, I don't think any planner I know wants to have a plan that's just going to gather dust on the shelf. And I think that's certainly the case now. We hope to see actions that will inspire and catalyze, help generate port revenue. The actions to me are both policy and physical, I think. Policy, there will probably be proposed refinements to the zoning code. There may be proposed refinements to the urban rules expenditure plan. The port may get direction on which properties to focus on immediately. There may be a need to do some environmental investigation. Who knows what will come out of the work that you're going to do in the next few months. But there will, I think also, I would anticipate saying, here's a key pedestrian connection that really should be made more amenable to utilization. Maybe this property here will be identified for an early development offering. Like, this is ready to go because of its location, because of other circumstances, because it's a simple site to develop. So I think we're expecting those sort of directions to the city and the port, say, hey, here's a vision, here's some things that we should start doing now to prepare for some short-term steps as well as long-term vision. I'm going to stop there. That's my overview. I'm going to ask if Brett or Meg or Matt or Will or Jonah, hope I'm not forgetting anything from the staff team, any other things that I missed that you want to point out?
Thanks, John. You covered a lot of it. There are a couple of things I would like to touch on as we kind of start to go through this process. And I think one of the most important aspects is really why the port exists. If you look at our mission, we're set up to be an economic driver and a job creator. And so I really think as we look at this redevelopment, we need to always kind of see it through that lens, because that's why we're here. And the other thing, and John, you touched on it a little bit, is although a lot of the port's assets and with this waterfront plan, they're entirely in City of Astoria jurisdiction, the port is actually a county-wide governmental district. And so I think there is a bit of a desire through this redevelopment to not completely cater to the tourism industry. I think in order to get support, not only within the city, but county-wide, I think the community needs to see some benefits as well. And sometimes, there are benefits from having more tourism, but I also think that's going to be an important angle as we go through this is how do we sell this to the community, and how do we make sure that they think they're sort of getting their piece of the pie. So those would just be a couple things I would add to John's comments.
That's great, Will. Thank you for that. By the way, we are going to post a recording of this session on the website. So if you need to go back and listen to important comments like that, you'll have that opportunity. Any other thoughts from Meg, Brad, anyone from the city? If not, I'm happy to go on.
John, one last thing, just I neglected to introduce Jen Benoit, who is the city manager's assistant and who is assisting on a lot of the coordination on this project. And Jen is on this meeting as well. So my apologies, Jen, for not doing that at the get-go.
Great,
Yeah,
you're
and
trying to say, go ahead, sorry.
I'll just say hi. I'm Meg, Community Development Director again. Just hi to everyone, and I'm so excited to kick off this project. And John, you did a great job in describing everything and how special Astoria is, and making sure that that's maintained throughout the process, and what we come up with is very important. And I'm looking forward to working with Will as well really closely and supporting the port. So just thank you, John, and everyone else.
Thank you, Meg. Appreciate that. You know, one of the things that I was reminded in our meeting with the staff in December, I think it was, that, you know, every city will say we're special, you know, and we want something that's really specific to us. And I agree with that, to be true to one's place. But I think if that's true of any city in Oregon, it's Astoria. It's extraordinary, and its sense of identity, I think, is probably stronger than any other city I know. With that, I will turn over to key elements of the RFQ. Just a couple of high-level notes here. One is, this is an RFQ. We originally drafted this as an RFP, but on some good advice, we decided to shift over to an RFQ. So what we are not looking for a specific scope. We're not looking for a price. That's premature. We want you to tell your story. Here's who we are. Here's what we've done, and here's why it's relevant to this master plan. I've had some conversations with several folks on this call about, you know, what's the ideal team look like, and those are great questions. But I want to say I think that the attitude on this side of the table is obviously read the RFQ, do your homework, and then say, all right, city, port, here's the team we have assembled, and here's why we think it's the right team to achieve your goals. So especially in talking to Brett a couple weeks ago, we're not looking to handhold and say, boy, the smart team will have this and this. I have my own thoughts, but it's really going to be up to you to come up with the right responsive team. I would like to now switch over, unless there's anything else about just the what we're looking for in the RFQ from city or port staff. Look around the room. I want to shift to the selection process briefly, and kind of tie that as well into the timeline to kind of go together. So first of all, we'll, of course, having this event today, we will receive your responses. The deadline is the 12th, April 12th. Everything moved back a week. Make sure everyone knows that this is not due next Monday. It's due Monday the 12th at 4 p.m. And then we will, the staff will evaluate the responses, give them a preliminary scoring, and based on that, identify, I'm thinking probably about 4, maybe 5 teams for interviews, a short list for interviews. It's possible there'll be 3 that really are way up here, and number 4, there's an obvious gap. In that case, it'll probably be 3 that we would interview. And then after that, selection will be made, provisional selection. That team, of course, we won't have a scope and we won't have a price, so we will then negotiate the scope and the price with that selected team, and I'm anticipating that will be, those negotiations will be successful, but it's always conceivable that we don't cross that finish line and then we go to the second team. And then hopefully the work will begin. My aggressive schedule is late May, early June. So let's talk about timeline as well. And then I'm going to stop and circle back to the staff for further comments before we get to the Q&A. So today is our pre-submittal meeting. Tomorrow, end of day, is the deadline for any other questions or requests for clarification. We will then post responses to those questions I think by this Friday is the target. It's kind of a soft target, but I think you'll have it by the end of this week, so that you'll have a full week as you finalize your response to the RFQ to incorporate whatever you learn from that Q&A paper. hopefully you all got the word that there's going to be a optional tour this Wednesday at 1 o'clock. We're meeting at the bistro, the first name of which I forget.
Bridgewater Bistro.
Thank you. The Bridgewater Bistro just outside there. Brett promises me that it'll be a sunny, pleasant day, so so you don't have to bring umbrellas or rain gear. It rarely rains in Astoria. It's amazing. So that's this week. The deadline is the 12th. Interviews we're shooting aggressively again for the week of the 26th, possibly the 30th. I should say that Jen is working with port staff to come up with blocks of time and interviews will take place, and then we'll post those so you can start to reserve blocks of time in the expectation that you will be one of the interview teams. So we will have that probably by the end of this week. We'll know what those dates are. We notified the selected team. I'm anticipating within a day of the final interviews. And then again, probably spend the month of May negotiating the scope and the fee, and then ink the contracts. Some of you have asked about the date of September as the hoped for completion of the project. I'll just admit, and Brett, you could kick me under the table, or Will, but that's pretty aggressive. And that's an aspiration, but obviously we will negotiate that once we select you and negotiate the scope. That'll include the schedule as well, and the budget, of course. With that, I'm going to stop once again for Brett, Meg, Will, Matt, Jeff, Jonah, if you want to weigh in with any clarifications of what I just said, disagree with me, or anything else that strikes you about the timeline, what we're trying to get in the RFQ, what sort of expectations we have in responses. Any comments from the staff before we go to Q&A? Okay. Well, it's a sleepy Monday morning, so I got you at a good time. With that, now's the time for Q&A, and there's a huge number. I can't see all of you on the screen, so maybe if I'll try to watch for a raised hand. But if you have a question, if you want to, you don't have to pose in the chat. If you would just say, "John, I have a question" or whatever, and then I'll go through the chat. We have officially another 35 minutes. I'm expecting we may go a little bit past 11, but so go ahead and if you just want to say you have a question in the chat, that's probably the easiest way for me to call on you. Well, it really is a sleepy Monday morning. Alexandra. We'll start with, sorry, I'm getting a bunch of questions. Okay, Brad Barnett, you're the first one on my list.
I won. Good morning. Brad Barnett from Methuen. I was wondering, John, if you could speak a little bit to the role that you anticipate playing on this project relative to the other members of the team that you've introduced earlier today.
Thank you. That's a great question. I'm assisting the staff. I'm not going to be a voting member on the evaluations, so I'm sort of doing the paperwork behind the scenes. But I will continue that role. Once the team is selected, I'll be the project manager effectively, or project coordinator for the city and the port. So I'm the person that will be working with you day to day, specifically under Brett's authority, but of course close consultation with Will as well.
Great, thank you.
You're welcome. I'm going to call on Alexandra Vondeling and then Lynn Farr after that.
Hi, yeah, I'm calling from Opticos, and we understand this is an RFQ, but we're just wondering if there's any kind of understanding of a budget at this point that you're hoping for a range.
We do not have a published budget, and Brad, if you want to jump in, feel free. But so far we're not planning on publishing a number or even a range. But Brad, do you want to refine that?
Yeah, I mean, what we're wanting to be able to do is once we find a team that is fitting all the things, or addressing all the things that we're looking for that meets all the needs of the project. We're wanting to be able to have that dialogue and really kind of understand, what can be brought to the table, how much will that cost, and be able to really kind of put together a project scope and a budget based upon that. I mean, I really hate to throw an arbitrary number out there, because we want to be able to put some meat on the bones to be able to get the best project that we can.
Okay, great. Hope that answers the question. I'm sorry we can't give a number. Len Farr and then Mike Zilas.
Yeah, John, you mentioned environmental assessment. I don't think this is a greenfield site. Much of Astoria's waterfront has been industrial historically. Any information, have there been any environmental assessments done? Is there any information at all about history or prior environmental studies?
I'm not aware. I appreciate the question. It's a good question. Will or Matt from the port, do we happen to have any available information, environmental assessments?
On the environmental side, I'm not aware of any.
I'll just speculate, Lynn, if there were through this process an identification of this is a site that should be redeveloped. Obviously, environmental is going to be an essential part of the due diligence process, and so I think that's a conversation that we will definitely have at some point in this process. With that, Mike Zilas and then Garland Woodsong.
Yeah, I had a similar question as Len about the base information. We've never worked on a waterfront that didn't have some kind of environmental issue. And so what I'm understanding, John, by your answer is that you're not expecting the team to do investigation or to do even a level 1 kind of approach.
I'll let my colleagues correct me, but that is my understanding. That's a due diligence thing. I could easily see that as one of the actions that you recommend. Again, this is the site that should be redeveloped. Your first steps is you should get some urban renewal dollars for environmental assessment. You should do a traffic study or something like that. But I think that technical analysis is probably not likely to be incorporated in this planning effort. And I really am looking to my colleagues if you disagree with that. I see head nods and affirmation, so.
Okay, it's just, we'd hate to set up a situation where your early phase project is one that's on the worst side environmentally. So you may want to think about that a little bit internally. The other question related is any structural information. I mean, spending a lot of time out there as we have in the recent past, obviously there's a lot of overwater structure. Is that available, or is that something you want the team to look at?
We do have a good bit of that information that we can provide. When we go through the walk on Wednesday, maybe there's some of the things that we can look at is just get a list of the structural components you might want to look at, and we can gather those together. Yeah,
I think everybody on the call here is just trying to figure out how much of all those technical aspects the team should provide. So anything you could give us, that'd be a benefit. Thank you.
Sure.
Mike, I appreciate that's a good observation. The decision to use the example I keep using of identifying a site that, at first brush looks like that's where we should start. And then if it turns out that it is, a Superfund site, we got a problem. And so I think I want to compare notes with my colleagues a little bit more. I'm formulating in my own mind an answer to that, but let me check before I commit them to spend a lot of money on consultants. With that, thank you, Mike, for that question. Garland, I have you next, and then DG.
Good morning. My question is, I keep on hearing reference to this 2007 waterfront vision plan. but I have not been able to find a copy. Maybe I'm not looking in the right places, or my Googling skills are a little bit dull this morning, but if you could send out a link to that plan or information on how to access it, that'd be very helpful since it keeps on being referenced.
We can certainly put it on the website, but Brett, were you going to say something?
Yeah. So all I have to say is that just on that plan, that was a plan that was not adopted, but it was a plan that there was work that was put into that effort, and the community and the port still refer to that work. So it's not anything that is officially in place, but it's something to be able to look at. And I don't want to speak for Will directly or the port directly, but I think that there's some ideas in there, but it's not necessarily taking everything that's in that document and bringing it forward, because it's 14 years later and there's some differences. Will, would you concur with that?
I would concur, and I obviously wasn't at the port when that plan was developed, but in going through it, there are some elements that I think are still going to be important today. One of the biggest ones I can think of is parking. They had a number of different ideas for if we're going to bring people down here of where we could put vehicles, because that is going to be one of the challenges. And so that's what I would add to that.
Okay, great. These are great questions. I have DG and then Brian Vanneman.
Hi, this is David Greensfelder, and this is really in the same vein as Mike's question, but rather than talking about the specific technical expertise that might be required, I'm wondering if there are any particular land uses that you're focused on. I mean, you talked about typologies, mixed use briefly, but are there specific things like residential, retail, office that you're hoping to accomplish?
Having listened to the joint meeting of the commission, the redevelopment commission, as well as the port board, I think they're pretty open to a broad set of ideas. I think the economic market analysis will very much help inform that. But if I'm discerning your question, it's not, I don't think there's a specific use. Like, we all know what this is really about is use X. I think it's much more open field. And as always, Brad or anyone will certainly feel free if you disagree, but I don't think there's a preconceived idea, except that it's probably going to be a broad range and not exclusively industrial.
Yeah, I would say that there are some adjacencies to some existing development there, which could play into how things could transition with development types. But both Will and John said earlier, Will said, from the port standpoint, they want to make sure that this is not an area just for tourists. The city's City of Astoria Council and the Development Commission, one and the same, said the same thing. It's not saying there can't be tourism, but this is not a tourism plan. It's looking for ways to be able to integrate some of the industrial developments there while continuing to promote a working waterfront component.
Thank you.
Thank you. I have Brian Vanneman and then Casey Jones.
Hey, good morning. Just a few follow-ups on last questions. One is regarding the structural information. If you do have recent reports on that, it would be wonderful if you'd post those somewhere where we can all look at them. I think that's a good question, interesting issue for the site, obviously. And then two questions. One is for the 2007 plan, was that a city plan or a port plan? And then also, could you just talk about the current zoning? My understanding is that it's industrial and essentially wouldn't allow the kinds of uses that you're talking about. And so presumably a rezone is an outcome of this plan.
So First of all, the plan, the 2007 plan was a port plan.
Okay.
So the zoning is actually a mixed type of zoning already. There have been rezonings that have happened within the past few years to implement the city's riverfront vision plan. And one thing that will need to be looked at is how does this overlap with the riverfront vision plan implementations, which may be a little bit more dealing with the built environment in terms of how wide structures can be, some of those types of things. But actually in this whole area right now, there's restaurants, hotels, there are maritime-based businesses there. That's where the cruise ship terminal is located. So it is not a purely industrial zone at this point in time, but it's one of the, there's aquatic and waterfront zones that we have, which include a kind of a host of different types of uses. But this plan could take a look at those existing uses and propose some changes. That's very much a possibility.
Yeah, Brett and I both work for the city of Hillsborough, and one of the things that we did in our downtown plan back then was we had, I think, Brett, we had like 5 different zones in a relatively concentrated area, and we basically got rid of that and had a single zone. And then we used a plan district with different heights and other requirements to refine it in certain areas. So, I mean, that's one, I guess that's just one scenario. But, next, I have Casey Jones and then Sam Stuckey.
Good morning and thanks. Casey Jones from Desmond. I have 2 questions related to the same topic, and that is parking. And the first question is, I think Will started to answer this. I'm curious to know what the feeling is about parking policy and operational potential recommendations. Will that factor prominently in this study? And the second question has to do with, I believe there's a 2006 parking study that was done internally by the city. And is your opinion that that's still relevant? Are there takeaways from that can still apply, or could this be redoing a lot of that same work?
Brett, yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, so over the years, there's been coordinated efforts between the city and the port to be able to address parking as new development comes online out at the port. But the parking plan really didn't focus, the 2006 parking plan didn't specifically focus on the port itself. I think, and I don't want to speak for Will, I'll let Will touch on this about, I mean, there are definitely going to be needs if we're looking at development and redevelopment opportunities. How do we accommodate that parking over in that area? There are a number of surface parking lots there presently, but it's something that I know it's on the port's mind to make sure that that's factored in. I mean, Will, do you have more you want to add?
Yeah, so I think there is a bit of an interesting dynamic down here, and that a lot of the parking and traffic are very seasonal. And so I think one of the challenges here is trying to take the spaces we have and try to make this seasonality work together. So for instance, when the Buoy 10 fishing season opens up, we're overloaded down here on the waterfront with vehicles parked. When we have special events or when the weather's good in the summer and the hotel's full, it tends to be a lot busier down here. And so I think that's going to be one of the challenges with this redevelopment, is making sure that these different mixed uses play well together, so to speak. And so I do think there are some opportunities for more parking down here at the port based on the way that things kind of get put together. But I would say, just to say that it is a major consideration, and even the time I've been here at the port, the parking issue has come up a number of times when we've just kind of on the surface explored some new ideas for down here. One of the, I think the big things and sort of exciting things for the port is one of our seafood processors down here, Bornstein Seafoods, has long had a plan to have a visitor type aspect to their operation, similar but on a much smaller scale to what you see down in Tillamook with the cheese factory. And so they've actually leased just a few months ago from the port a piece of vacant property for which they're holding right now, probably for parking in the future. And so I don't know if that kind of fully answers the question, other than to say it is a major consideration, and I think we do have the assets available to make something work, but it may take some creativity.
Thank you.
Great question. I have Sam Stuckey, then Samantha Jordan, and then Christine Thompson. So Sam Stuckey.
Hi, good morning. Thank you. Sam Stuckey with YBA Architects. I was just wondering if you guys are going to want us to include the hourly rates of core team members or core staff in the submission response.
I was not expecting that, since we're not talking about price, but Brad or Will, do you want to see hourly rates, our rate sheets in the response?
Let me circle, John, let's circle back with that. I want to just chat maybe a little bit more internally, so if we can get back on that. Okay, great. That'll be part of the Q&A later this week. Samantha Jordan and then Christine Thompson.
Thank you. Actually, my question was answered earlier when you said that you'd be sending out the study, the 2007 study. So I chimed in, I guess, just as that was being answered. So I appreciate it.
Great, terrific. Christine Thompson and then Matt Brown.
Yeah, hi, thank you. Christine Thompson from Page. And I had a question. You mentioned the community wanting to get something out of the plan. And this seems to be a pretty short study time-wise. Do you have a plan for interfacing with the community? Do you have a sense of how they would feel best responded to?
Another great question. My presumption, the way I see this is, well, maybe I should let Brett, looks like you're ready to talk first. Go ahead.
Well, I mean, if you go for it, and I'll add on.
Well, yeah, I think once the team is selected, we will work out a community engagement component of that. Obviously, it will be in the context of COVID, which, as we all know, is a challenge. I'm sure we've all had to deal with the limitations that imposed, but also some opportunities. So I think we will work on crafting that together. I think there's a desire on part of the port and the city to be pretty tight and focused in getting this work done, but it's got to honor the historian's expectation to have a voice in that. And so that's a needle we will need to thread. But I'm sorry, there's not a specific, like, we're going to do X community forums, we're going to do these other outreach pieces. I think we're going to talk through that with you. And by the way, if there's a price issue, I think that's an opportunity. All right, are there elements that the city or the port can do to reduce the fee to keep it within whatever budget we ultimately land on? So Brett.
Yeah, I mean, John, you've got it. You've got a lot of what I was going to say is I mean, first of all, there is a desire to make sure that there is community involvement and engagement. There are stakeholders within the port property themselves that are going to be important to be able to hear from, and there will be interest from the community at large. So we will want to include that in the conversation and negotiating the scope of work. But I think that that while as John said, there's a desire to be able to get the project done. we want to make sure that we're getting the project done with all of the necessary steps to be able to get to to an approval and to have some level of community consensus. So it's something that'll have to be discussed more when we go through scope development.
Okay, thank you.
And I would just add to that, I think there are various levels to that outreach, and as we sort of narrow in on the area of study, I think we probably give more weight to some of that input. So as I talked about earlier, the port is a countywide district, so some of that input I think needs to come from throughout the county, as well as within the city of Astoria. And then as Brett touched on, it's also going to be important to get feedback from the tenants and users and sort of neighboring businesses of this area as well. Because I think some of that feedback probably could have the most value as they're the ones down here and operating on this property on a day-to-day basis and have a lot of knowledge of some of the things that others may not be as aware of. And so I think that's going to be an important piece of this.
Thank you.
Thank you, Will. I will point out many of us on this call have been involved in all kinds of planning efforts with all kinds of property ownership. And as we know, the typical, like, again, downtown Hillsborough, you have property owners who are really dialed in and are helping, wanting to be part of solutions. Then you have some who are not so involved. Either they don't want to, they're hostile or whatever. I think it's an advantage that, again, that we have a single property owner. Will points out there's a variety of users and tenants. So it's not like the port is the only one with a voice here, but it's an advantage if we come up with a set of solutions. We don't have to worry about, all right, some of the property owners are going to fight us on this. That's not going to be the case. We have the client is the owner.
John, I would just add to that real quick. The port has done some outreach to some of the largest tenants and users, and it's been pretty unanimous that they're really supportive of moving forward with this process. So that was good to hear.
Yeah, my sense in talking with you, Will, with Matt, with city officials is that I think there's real alignment. And I'm even more pleased to hear what you just said, Will, that your businesses are also dialed into this. So, again, one of the biggest challenges doing these plans is when you don't have alignment, and that's actually almost axiomatic. I think in this case, I'm going into this starting with the attitude that we don't have institutions we got to fight. There's going to be different agendas we got to keep in mind, but I think everyone's pretty much on the same page at the outset, and that's a really good place to be in.
And not to speak for Brett, but I know that I'm going to do my best to try to get my elected commission to play nice through this process. And I think there's a desire on the city's side to do the same thing. So hopefully that continues. We had a really good kickoff meeting, so that was encouraging.
Great. I only have one other question. It's not too late to register if you have a question, but Matt Brown.
Yeah, good morning, John. Morning, everyone. My question has to do with, in the longer term, whether or not participation, let alone priming this, would put at risk our ability to deliver, full service design on any of the projects that would come forward through it. Is there anything? I didn't see any language that would bar that kind of participation. Presumably, if a firm were in that position, we'd want to get through the study and be in a position where there wouldn't be a conflict of interest in the long term. But I can say we'd certainly be interested in that possibility. So I'm just curious if there's been thought put into that. Thanks.
I understood your question. I would think it'd be a virtue if a firm is part of this planning effort and then has a relationship or cultivates a relationship with a port or with a user or whatever, and then is part of the subsequent implementation phase. I don't know why that would be a challenge, but Will or Brett, do you have any concern along those lines?
I mean, I don't, but if any further work that may be managed by the port. So Will, do you have any more thoughts?
I guess speaking just broadly, I don't see it as being an issue. I guess there could be a set of circumstances that come up that could create a conflict. But on the surface, I don't see that being an issue.
Did we get your question right, Matt?
Yeah, no, that's great. Yeah, I'm just curious because we work with a lot of ports and with a lot of private developers, and obviously there's an opportunity for a confluence here, and so we just want to make sure that we're by participating and in effect starting out firmly in the port on the port side, and and continuing to provide services for the port, that there aren't concerns about sort of an eventual merger of potential private development interests, depending on how an implementation plan and the particular strategies for procurement would unfold. But that answers my question. That's great.
Great, terrific. Alexandra, you had another question.
Yeah, it's more of a clarification from what was talked about earlier. So understanding the aggressive schedule, there's not an expectation that an environmental study or further structural studies will be done at this point, and that we be working with what information we have at hand. Is that correct?
I think I want to buy some time. I do want to compare notes with Brett and Will on this issue of subs that may be relevant to the planning work. So watch later this week for my response on that. Let's see, I saw Juliet Sinistera, and then Ben, and then Connie.
Great. Thanks, John. Quick question. Does the Clatsop or Chinook tribe have any jurisdictional oversight over the waterfront? 1, and 2, is there a desire to engage the tribes in the community engagement process?
So there's no jurisdictional issue with the Chinook or the Clatsop Nehalem tribes, other than, of course, if there's any federal projects, those tribes are needing to be consulted whenever there's any of that type of work. But I'll say that there's always availability for all interested parties to be included in the conversation, and but the two tribes themselves have some different focuses between the two of them, and there's been conversations on some of the more historically recognized properties within the area, and the city has worked with both those tribes recently on another Parks Department project, to be able to work with them. And so, the city's able to work along with them to be able to gain their input, but it's not something that would be directly assumed, but it's open for all individuals to participate.
Okay, Ben, and then Connie Chung.
Great, thank you. Hi, I'm Ben Gates with Urban Patterns, and thank you for this meeting and the really helpful Q&A for context. My question is around market studies, and as we think about working towards this ambitious timeline, and also kind of thinking outside of the box, it would be good to be rooted in any existing studies of supply and demand for space, as well as lease rates, especially as we think about creating an implementation plan that looks to do something now in today's market reality as we think towards the future. Is there any market studies that have been commissioned by the port or by the city in respect to city or port owned property or citywide that could be helpful for this process?
Brett, before you answer, I can't remember, we talked before, I asked you before, and I can't remember your answer about an EOA. Is there a recent EOA, for instance, or other data about industrial achievable rents, retail, et cetera, and market demand and all that?
The most recent is we have our city's economic development strategy, which was completed a few years ago. That's going to be kind of the most recent thing, kind of on a broad sense for the city of Astoria. I don't know if the port has anything more specific.
Yeah, and Matt, maybe you could jump in here too as well. I do know we've had some recent study work on the impact of cruise ships here in Astoria. That's obviously changed over the last 12 months, but we're hoping at some point that resumes, and that obviously has a huge impact not only down here at the waterfront, but pretty widespread as well. Matt, do you have any more info on that?
No, we've not done anything specifically, any broad market studies. We have some individual components, like we've done some studies and appraisals for some of the buildings, like the red building down on the waterfront, and then some of the airport properties, but nothing broad.
I would say to all the listeners, again, look at both the website as well as our response to all of the Q&A, including individual questions we've received over the last several weeks. By the end of this week, I think we might, I'll talk with you, Matt McGrath, about, or Will, about the cruise ship study. That might be interesting. And then the ECDEV strategy. I will note what we all know, that as Will just said, with the change with COVID, information we have is this is actually timely to do a new study because we are in a new reality, and I think it's going to be a while before we sort of come out of it. Let's see. Oh, did Connie Chung?
Hi, everyone. Connie Chung from HR&A Advisors. I'm curious to the city and the port team, and maybe also John, what, at the end of the day, at the conclusion of the study, what decisions will you want to be taken, and what pieces of information do you want to be able to kind of move forward with?
I'll take a first stab, and then Brett and Will, please jump in. But I think it'll be, we'll be looking for this plan to be adopted, which includes all the background work, the market analysis you do, and the evaluation and recommendations for multimodal access and connections, all those pieces. And then I see it as also including, okay, now here's your implementation plan. And in the first year to 3, you need to amend your urban renewal plan. You need to make these changes to the zoning code. And of course, your recommendations will not be in a vacuum. They will have had some public community vetting. And of course, the clients, both the city and the port, will have had a lot of say in the recommendation. But I think the plan will be adopted by both boards, but then the work begins. All right, that plan adopted back in early 2022 says we're going to make major amendments to our renewal plan. I'm making it up as an example. And so now we have to go through the process of making those amendments. So my presumption would be that having both boards endorse this plan, then that they are accepting those as their marching orders and the staff's marching orders. So I hope that kind of makes sense, and I invite Brett and Will and anyone else from the city or port team to chime
in. I'm good. You got it on my side.
Yeah, I would just reiterate, I think it's the hope of the port that sort of the more detail and the more actionable items we have, the better. I think we talk about in the RFQ that it should not only be aspirational, but it should also be something that's implementable. And the port has, had a history, as shown by the fact that the 07 plan was never really adopted or moved forward. We definitely don't want to have that happen again. We want a plan that that creates some excitement, but's realistic and feels like something that we can start moving on. And so from the port's perspective, having something that's detailed, that feels like it's attainable, is going to be important.
So are there any other questions? As a reminder, you actually have till the end of the day tomorrow if you think of something. If you do have a question, I would ask that you send it both to myself and also to Jen Benoit. And my email address is John, John. In fact, I'll put it in the chat as well as Jen's. But last call for questions for right now. It's 11 o'clock straight up. So, okay, I'm going to put in my email address. Jen, could you do the same thing? And then, oh, there you go. So back to our agenda. Closing comments for me, and then I'll turn it back to Brett. Is just a reminder that I can't find the sheet of paper where I have my closing comments. We are going to have, we will post the attendee list. We will also post a tape or a recording of this session. And then we also, like I said earlier, hope to have by the end of this week the interview schedule, so you could block out that time. And of course, we'll work with you if you need to just go for the different hour, we'll figure it out. But hopefully you could get that on your calendar early enough to kind of put that placeholder. With that, I am done, and thank you all for your time. Really appreciate you taking the time to show up and some great questions. And I'm gonna turn it over to Brett.
Yeah, I just want to close it out and say thank you for showing up today to show your interest in submitting requests for qualifications. Both the port and the urban renewal district are very, very excited about this. I mean, Mr. Isom, Will Isom mentioned the great joint commission meeting that we had a few weeks ago to kick this up. It's wonderful to see all of our elected officials becoming excited about this, and that there's excitement within the community as well, that we're hearing folks talk about that they're glad to be able to see something moving forward. So look forward to hearing something on requests for qualifications, and thank you again. Appreciate it.